Good morning. So we have here the next generation rotorcraft capability team. First we will do a roundtable. Okay, a bit closer, thank you. So my name is Cyril Ekel. I'm working at the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, and we will be the contracting authority for the concept stage of NGRC for the next 3 years. And I give the floor to my colleague from NATO HQ.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you all for coming here at this very comparatively early hour, I guess, depending on how you look at it. So my name is Joachim Hofbauer. I'm working at the NATO HQ in Brussels. I'm the head of the Multinational Capability Cooperation Unit there. And what I'm in charge of is helping allies and partners actually pursue specific multinational cooperation efforts. In NATO speak, we call those multinational high visibility projects because they normally focus on capabilities that really should make a difference for the alliance. And the next generation rotograph capability falls within this definition.
So I'm Colonel Armament Nicolas Cordier from the French Defense Procurement Agency. I'm in charge of preparing future programs in the field of air mobility. That is aircraft, transport aircraft, helicopters, and I'm also in charge of surveillance and protection programs.
Good morning, Colonel Alex Woolman. I'm part of the UK Army, working at Army headquarters, and I work in the Futures Directorate under General Bowder, and specifically in MILCAP plans. So my responsibilities really are looking at the future into the second decade to see where the next generation capabilities are, how we may exploit those a little bit earlier on our legacy fleets, and how we get to that transformative point in capability terms against the threat.
Good morning, thank you. Colonel Pierluigi Verdecchia from the Italian MOD, National Armaments Directorate. I'm Chief of Industrial Cooperation and International Relations and the Italian National Representative within the Next Generation Capability Expert Group, and also co-chairing with Colonel Alex the works that we've been doing on the initiative. It's a pleasure to be here, and we look forward to a good discussion, hopefully.
Thank you all. So indeed, as mentioned, so we are starting the concept stage for the NGRC, and we are working with 6 nations for this activity. And at NSPA, so we will be the contracting authority, and currently we are preparing these activities for the concept stage, including the definition of which are the objectives and the requirements from nations for the concept stage, and to establish the different statement of works and contractual activities. So maybe I invite you, Alex, first to tell us a bit more about which are the objectives from the nations for the NGRC program.
I think the Next Generation Rotorcraft program is a really exciting proposition, and we've done pretty well to get to where we are now. Moving into the concepts is really going to define the requirements based against the threats that we're going to be facing globally, and equally looking to that sort of next generation capability where we can really deliver a transformative vertical lift capability across the nations. So what's exciting for me is one of the first sheet design aircraft I hope will be delivered. And actually where you look at the threats that are going on at the moment and the development of technologies, we find it quite difficult to keep up with the technological advances, be it in manpads, SAM systems, etc., and evolve our legacy fleets in an efficient, timely and quick manner. So NGRC for me is about transforming that capability, delivering an aircraft or an airframe or a system that is open system architecture based, has digital backbones, and is able for us as soldiers and airmen to be able to modify that aircraft and keep up with the pacing threat. What we're looking at is specifically is a leap in capability, so in range and speed and performance at height and across all environments, within being able to operate within an electronic warfare spectrum, and many, many more. So we have a list of attributes that we've put out across industry, which will be refined over the next 2 to 3 years. And it's really about a next generation capability for the nations to be able to deliver that vertical lift across the spectrum of operations that we will see and meet in the future.
Thank you, Alex. So indeed, we can see that you have the nations high-level expectations for this program. So Joachim, maybe you can tell us a bit more about indeed the challenges to set up such a cooperation between ambitious set of nations.
Yeah, certainly. I think when we talk about multinational cooperation in the defense world, it's actually a little bit of a funny thing, in my opinion, like having to deal with it on a daily basis. Because if you talk about it or look at it at a theoretical, abstract level, everybody gets it. Everybody thinks it's a good idea. When you say, should we cooperate more? Like, normally everybody nods. But it becomes a little bit more complicated and tricky when you're trying to translate this theoretical appeal into actual practical action. That you start an actual specific program, and even more importantly, try to generate some tangible output here. So I think this is, for a variety of reasons, as you already mentioned, we are bringing here, for instance, in the context of NGRC, 6 sovereign nations together. They all have different ways how their bureaucracies work, how they approach the topic, different bureaucratic biases, different funding mechanisms, different funding cycles, maybe also different thoughts about the requirements. So to really, bring this together and herd the proverbial cats, is actually quite challenging. And I think on the flip side, that's exactly where, not to toot our own horn too much here, but I think that's exactly where NATO comes in and can play a critical role to help support the allies and partner nations in doing so. And I think it's really boils down to 2 pieces here. There's one piece on the political side where, we are the ones who are trying to facilitate and generate the political buy-in, ideally speaking, for a project of this magnitude at a very senior level, so defense ministers level. Why do we do this? Because I think a lot of the obstacles I just described can be maybe not always overcome, but at least mitigated if you have a strong senior political buy-in. So that's point number 1. And the second point is going back to the requirements piece, where you need this honest, neutral, but also well-informed interlocutor that can help the participants to really align their thinking so that we can come up with what at the end of the day is a compelling package, what we're going to pursue, that then sets us on a positive trajectory towards actually succeeding and delivering something that is meaningful.
And so I mentioned it before, but can you tell us about the status of the legal arrangement between nations? We had an important step this morning, so I know that you want to celebrate this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always very, very grateful task to deliver a good news story. So actually for today is actually a rather important initial milestone when it comes to NGRC, because just a little bit over an hour ago, the defense ministers of the 6 participating allies signed the Memorandum of Understanding for launching the concept stage of NGRC. And this is obviously great on a personal level for me, but more importantly, when you look at it from a media perspective, it's important, but most importantly, it's really about the content and the practical implications, what this MOU means, because it captures very clearly and explicitly what are the rules of engagement, how those 6 allies want to work together on this task. What is the ambition? What do you actually want to pursue? And last but not least, and probably most importantly, it actually also captures the financial commitment that comes with this, because as we all know, ambitions are great, but as long as they're not supported by adequate resources, they don't really lead to anything tangible.
Thank you, Joachim. So you nicely introduced this political layer for the agreement between nations before starting the activities. And Alex, before you presented the high-level objective for the program, Pierluigi, I invite you maybe to tell us a bit more about the objectives for this concept stage.
Yes, thank you. It is indeed a day of celebration for us, because it's obviously the completion of 2 years of hard work in the pre-concept phase, which also was aimed at drafting this MOU. And as Joachim said, you cannot really engage into a serious initiative if you don't have all those aspects in place. So political commitment, a view, a vision for the project, and financial coverage, which bonds us, 6 nations, and the initial group of 6 nations that we look forward to enlarge soon, to really start working in defining the concept. And it may sound, when you look at general projects, one of the standard phases of every new development of a system, but in this case, it's really a breakthrough phase, because we're looking at a next generation capability, something that is really somehow different from everything that we are used to work with. And in our Army Aviation in Italy, we go from the UH-1 to the NH-90 and CH-47F, and soon the new nest, the 249. So really broad range of technologies and capabilities. And framing what the contents of this new concept will be require a lot of communication and understanding in driving this phase, which is aimed at doing all the in-depth analysis which will apply to what then will become the design of this new capability. So we are, let's say, on day one, we have set a list of initial attributes, and together with the expert team, we're starting to draw and understand what our common vision, talking about the requirement of the necessity of interacting among nations to make sure that we have a common understanding of where we want to go together, which is, I think, a key element of a multinational program. And it wasn't always easy. If I smile because I've been sitting in the first meeting and we are now up to the 13th. And there have been some times in which, national perspectives, national positions have been brought to the table of discussion with a degree of energy to then sort of convey in this common project. And I think that we've seen also a great improvement in our own interpersonal relationships, and this really helps understanding and facilitating the exchange of information, and also our own national staffing processes to then realign for the next steps the activities. We've seen for these new types of systems areas that are common to all next generation types of platforms. When we talk about open structures in terms of software and modular systems, the requirement of integration of systems going towards the digitalization of all the functions of the aircrafts, aligned also with new performance capabilities which are necessary to ensure that these new technologies not only are in place, but they also communicate among all these systems and subsystems of the aircraft, but also with the, can you hear me? With the command and control structures and with the other operators and systems in the battlefield. The key is starting from an understanding of the new threat environment. And unfortunately, we have been supported in understanding what the new threat environment, looking closely at some of the current crises, which have given us a great indications on the requirement of being capable of entering a denied airspace, and to ensure that we can carry out our mission, which not only is linked to the lift capability, the air mobile and transport functions, but also those functions of, as we were saying, penetrating enemy air defense, ensuring that we are integrated and interconnected with all the elements on the battlefield, the sensors, the satellites, the units operating on the ground, the fire networks, and this requires a degree of high-level definition of the interconnectivity of the systems and of the weapon systems in general. We know that we have a very tough role in leading the studies which will be part of this concept phase, studies that will be assigned both to our government entities, but mostly to the industry through a process that we also had to define and agree to ensure that through NSPA we can clearly commission outputs which will be necessary to come up at the end of these 3 years. At the moment, the concept phase is planned to be completed in 2025 with a clear understanding of what is the preferred option, including all the outputs of the different studies, which are directed in many directions, going from power plants to performance issues. What we will see as mostly the set of operational capabilities of CONOPS that the platforms will be required to do, and in what environment. Now, we've seen also, we were just discussing yesterday, addressing some of the attributes regarding performance and looking at how high the temperature was in Paris yesterday. That maybe also those parameters, which are the normal standard parameters that we were used to, will need to be refined, looking at a 20, 30, 40-year evolution in terms of also indications on a greater temperature environment that we're leading towards. And as you all know, this strongly reflects on helicopter performance and capabilities in terms of load, airspeed, and limitations. So I think that this sort of describes the work that we'll be conducting in the next 3 years. Together with the financial administrative arrangements, also there will be the setup of a program office within NSPA, which has been discussed, and it will be organized and structured to lead these studies and manage the program with participations of the partner nations. And it would be the sort of the leading soul, together with the steering committees, to manage these 3 years of, I think, really ambitious and exciting activity.
Thank you, Pierluigi. So you mentioned it that with the current threats we see and how it can evolve really fast, and with also a wide variety in the threats we face today, and with the current attributes you have for the project. So they are not requirements yet, but these attributes they describe which are the main features and performance you expect for NGRC. And regarding the concept of operation, Nicolas, can you tell us about how difficult is it to establish this kind of documents at the beginning of the project, especially before starting the concept stage?
Okay, yes. First, I would like to thank you, Cyril and Joachim, for the very good news this morning, because it looks like we're only starting the work, but it's important to profit from the good milestones that we have reached this morning, because that was already difficult to reach this step after 1.5 year work. But as we all said, it's only the start of the work, and we all have very high ambitions. We all know the challenging environment we are going to face. We all want a helicopter that flies faster, further, that can carry more payload, that would be stealthier, and that would be more connected, that can do everything. But at the end, what we have to do is to fulfill specific missions that we have to define together. And any country who has tried to launch a cooperation with other countries knows how difficult it can be to define a common operation lead that will be the basis of the development we want to launch. So as you said, Pierluigi, we defined attributes like temperature, speed, and so different performances we would like to reach. But also we try to aggregate them together in actual concept of operations that at the end we will have to fulfill, and this concept will be the basis of what we will give to the industry to make these studies that will tell us what can be done and what is too ambitious. Talking of speed, we all want a helicopter that goes faster to the place of action, that carries faster the injured soldiers, that does anything faster, but we know that speed has a cost, and we have to study this concept of operations to know what speed brings us, what we lose because of speed, what flying more payload brings us, but what we will lose in terms of range or speed, and we have to consider all these performances in actual operational situations. So this is why we defined a dozen of concepts covering the whole range of missions we the 6 nations want to reach at the end. The first one obviously is to make a transport helicopter and an assault helicopter for land warfare. So we defined a common mission with a helicopter that takes off from some place, that flies for such a time to reach a place of operation where we want to have a play time of so much time, and fulfill such mission, and then has to be able to come back under threats that we have defined, that we will refine together. A second example of concept of operation is a series of multi-missions, a series of different missions. You have to carry logistics, then you have to come back fast to go and pick up injured soldiers, then you have to come back fast and launch an assault mission. And this series is a goal in itself, because we don't want a helicopter that is able to do something but needs after that 10 hours maintenance. We have to be able to make this chance of missions in a row very fast, very efficiently. We also defined specific missions like reconnaissance and assault, personal recovery, medical evacuation. We already talked about it. So far I talked a lot about land missions, but we also want to make a helicopter that has a naval version like the NH-90 and other helicopters. And this helicopter would have to be able to carry anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface naval warfare. Beside the completely military field, we would like this helicopter to be able to help face civilian crises, climate crisis, humanitarian assistance, relief facing disaster. So as you see, it's a broad set of missions that we have defined, and that will feed the studies Pierluigi talked about. And at the end, within the 3 coming years, we have to know what is the best architecture to fulfill the most complex set of these missions.
Thank you.
I can also add a few points. Another area which we've not mentioned, it might seem that comes as a sort of a second priority, but I can assure you, out of my 25 years plus of operational experience in the helicopter field, that it's on the top of the list, is the availability, the maintenance, ease of maintenance of the aircrafts, in terms also of management, and also the affordability, to ensure that these aircrafts not only perform but are in flying conditions and are available and can be with flexibility and modular capability, retasked for additional missions as one of the other additional priorities. And we've seen how throughout our current programs this has been one of the key aspects that we're always striving to improve, and in which technology also can bring us to great innovations. Also in engineering some parts out of the aircraft, like the pilot, for example. That's one of the elements of risk But besides the jokes, also the capabilities of having automated piloting or optional piloting will be addressed in studies as an additional feature. And as I was saying, we've gone in our experiences from the absolutely non-assisted UH-1 to the fully automated fly-by-wire machines that have caused a generation change in the way we plan and conduct flying missions and operations. And it will be interesting to see how the next step in having an aircraft capable of conducting its own machine, but not because it's been pre-planned, because it's actually capable of understanding what is happening and in assisting the pilot who will become mostly a manager of systems, what's the best course of actions to accomplish the mission. This obviously is the future, as you know. We've seen it in the movies, but these movies are not science fictions anymore. They're coming really close to our daily life and experiences. So this is another really interesting part of the concept development.
Thank you, Pierluigi. So first, Nicolas, thank you for the kind words for NATO. And it allows me also to introduce shortly the acquisition pillar of NATO. Because as you mentioned, so Joachim is working for the NATO defense investment, and he's the real architect of NGRC, because with his teams he was able to create the synergies between nations to make this cooperation alive. And we work closely together. So for NATO DI is responsible for this political arrangement, and then NSPA we will be the contracting authority, so to monitor on behalf of the nations the concept stage. And I take your point about affordability, because when we spoke 30 minutes and we mentioned that we have these attributes dealing mainly with operational capabilities, but indeed affordability is an important point, and for us at NSPA we take care of this programmatic aspect. So which are the cost impact not only for the concept stage but for the entire life of the system. So when we make the decisions at the concept stage, which will be the impact of these decisions for the entire life cycle of the system. And we also want to assess from the early stage which is the possible master schedule of NGRC, again, through the entire life of the system. So these are important points that we want to tackle also through the concept stage, in addition to the CONOPS and all the features and performance capability we are targeting. And again, bouncing on this aspect, we also mentioned, all of us, I think, innovation. And NGRC is a lot about innovation. So you mentioned the speed, open system architecture, affordability, which are, according to you, so our national experts, the most important innovations you expect to be implemented through NGRC. So I don't know who wants to answer first.
So, from my perspective, it's really difficult, this business, predicting the future. And what we're trying to do is design a system which gives us transformative capabilities and second guess and have a really good idea of what the threat is in the second decade, the third decade, and the fourth decade. So I think what's really important from my perspective is also making sure that whatever we procure or whatever we buy in capability terms has growth potential as well. And has the ability and flexibility to adapt not just the new technologies, but to adapt to the enemy and what they're trying to do to us. I don't think we're going to get it 100% right, but I think our job is to predict that as much as we possibly can to give the best system and capability to our soldiers and airmen.
Well, if I should choose what is the real innovative breakthrough content, not because it's actually something that defines the capability, but because it brings us to a new era of machines, is the speed requirement. That is definitely something that puts us in a new set of capabilities, because physics applies to rotorcrafts, and if you don't change the engineering structure of a legacy aircraft, you're limited to remain constrained to those airspeeds. So this is definitely a big step, because all the other attributes that we talked about, they can be developed and applied to a standard legacy platform. So we can make better helicopters, but if we could define what really indicates that we are stepping into a new generation type of machine, that would be the speed attribute. And I think that will concur to define the overall capabilities of this aircraft, which is not high speed, but it's to be capable of surviving enemy threats and be effective on the battlefield. And speed may be one of the elements which will allow this improvement.
So I think, Pierre Luigi's absolutely right with the speed to a certain degree as well. I think looking at the open systems approach that we keep talking about, I'm no means a systems expert in this at all, but understanding the sort of level that I do understand it at, it really is a game changer, certainly in where you're trying to modernise your aircraft, transform your aircraft, integrate technology at a rapid pace, and be able to make it affordable. Because at the moment, with our enduring or legacy platforms, however you wish to put it, it's really difficult and expensive to put new things onto those platforms. I think we all experience it, certainly the UK experiences it. So where we're talking about the open systems approach with digital backbones and all that sort of good stuff, I think having that on the next generation rotorcraft, which is quite difficult to engineer back into an enduring fleet for certification reasons and various other things, I think that's a real game changer, which will put the ability in the front line, either military's hands, to be able to procure, buy systems of systems which will enhance our mission effectiveness and equally keep at pace with that pacing threat on a speed of relevance, quite frankly. So I think the open system side of things is really important.
Well, Cyril, it's quite difficult to isolate a specific innovation that we would like to develop, because we are facing a very complex environment and very challenging environment, and we cannot rely on one specific thing. And I do agree that we have to explore what speed will bring us. That modularity is very important, because we don't want one version starting from a 35 for the next 50 years for any force and any country. You're totally right. I could give two other examples of innovation that we would like to develop. We talked about maintenance and availability. I think we can get a lot of improvement through predictive maintenance, seeing where the failure will come before they actually happen. That will help us increase our availability, and all countries know how difficult it is to have available helicopters at a very high level. And another topic of innovation, and I'm sorry if it's almost obvious, but it's the cooperation between piloted aircraft, piloted helicopters, and UAVs. Flying UAVs, but also maybe later ground UAVs, and it's a brand new field that we are trying to develop. We have been trying to develop for a very short period of time so far, and we know how much it will change our concept of operations, and how much we have to think about it and to be ready for this.
Thank you. I think you provided a good idea of which are the expected innovations, and indeed I can confirm that when we have NGRC for next generation, I confirm that I know that from the nations there is an appetite to be disruptive and to have these new innovations implemented into NGRC, and so that the new system is able to have also new innovations later, and it's scalable, so we can have innovations through the life cycle of the system. I go back again on the variety and diversity of threats we face today and with the current crisis, and we see that for us at NATO, currently we are trying to leverage the synergies between nations. And Joachim, we have major programs like AFFC or the multinational MRTT fleet. Now we have NGRC. Do you think that for the future, our role at NATO for the acquisition pillar will be more and more important, and we will have more opportunities to deliver something efficient to nations?
So the short answer is yes, and I recognize that I might be a little bit biased when I talk about FIS. So take it with a little bit of grain of salt here. But like in seriousness, I mean, I'm going to quickly walk you through why I say yes with a conviction here. I think, you know, when we take out of context the current security situation, the real intellectual starting point is that when we talk about those programs, the participants recognize and appreciate the underlying value proposition that they offer. And when I say value proposition, I'm not talking about the theoretical appeal that I mentioned earlier, but I'm really talking about the ability to deliver something real world, no kidding, I can touch it, physical, that can make a difference for our men and women in uniform. And I think we have there a track record where this is already happening. It comes in different shapes and forms. It can actually make a difference in a variety of areas. So I give you an example. We have, for instance, a project or a series of projects where allies and partner nations work together on acquiring munition. This is obviously not as sexy as working at the next generation of the rotorcraft capability. I recognize this, but what this projects did is they deliver cost savings in the double digits. And that's something that is being appreciated. And when we now talk about those munitions and now put it into the context of the current situation, we know like a lot of nations have supported Ukraine by transferring munitions, and there is now a demand obviously for backfilling those inventories, and that's then exactly, you know, where I think it amplifies this value proposition this effort offers. Or similarly, when you look at the multinational MRTT fleet, which is basically a fleet of air-to-air refueling aircraft, the value proposition it brings to the participants is what I like to call the democratization of capabilities. So we're talking here about comparatively high-value assets that cost a lot to operate in an economically feasible way. And by setting it up in a smart and conducive multinational fleet construct, you suddenly broaden the range of nations that can have access to this capability, that can be a part in providing this capability. And again, you know, when you then put it back into context of Ukraine, those aircraft, they have been flying every single day since the Ukraine crisis started in support of increased air operations on our eastern flank. They have, I think the last number I saw, they have offloaded around 6 million liters of fuel, refueled hundreds of aircraft. So I guess the point is, does the changed security situation really change anything? No. I think it just amplifies things. It kind of reinforces the logic that was already there before. And I think in certain capability areas, it might actually increase the urgency for allies and partners to do something. And I think what then our challenge will be, not only to set the stage for them to cooperate together, but also to set the stage for cooperating at the speed of relevance. Because in many of those instances, the question is not only, okay, can I deliver something, but when can I do this? Because, you know, maybe in 10 or 15 years, having the exquisite system is great, but it might not check the box with regard to what my needs and requirements are right now.
Thank you, Joachim. And I think you mentioned a fair point about speed of relevance, because I consider myself as still new in NATO. So I joined 3 years ago, but I can see that we are focusing on NATO to deliver to nations something, as I said, efficient and at speed of relevance. And I see that with the increasing request from nations and this request for synergies between nations to cooperate, I see that at NATO we have this capability, we have Center of Excellence, we have also feedback from the NAIMA program. So this is something to the benefit of nations, so we are able to deliver something efficient but fast. So, and especially for NGRC, when we target innovations, it is not that we have to deliver within 20 or 30 years, we have to deliver the earliest, so the innovations, when we are in service, they are they are still innovations and not something we expect for the future. I think this closes our debate for this morning. Now I will let the floor to the audience for some possible questions. Gaia, can I give you one mic, please? Okay, merci.
Hi, Jen Judson with Defense News. I wanted to ask, particularly for Colonel Willman, the U.S. and the U.K. have signed a memorandum of understanding, I believe, on future vertical lift. So how does that sort of cross-pollinate with what you're doing here in NATO? How do you work through balancing your partnership with the United States and what they're doing and what you're doing here?
So we've signed a program agreement, not an MOU. So the program agreement allows us bilaterally to speak to the CFTs in the United States to see what they're doing in the future vertical lift side of things. So we're looking at their concepts, how they got to their conclusions, where there could be mutual opportunities and everything else, but not necessarily buying the FEL aircraft as such. So for me, this sits alongside next generation rotorcraft, and there are two aspects of the future vertical lift, being the long range assault, but also being the attack reconnaissance aircraft. There's aspects of that program we're interested in, but we haven't committed to anything. So, it's from a UK perspective, looking at both sides, absolutely committed to NGRC, and going through a number of studies through the program agreement at a more sensitive level with the US, which the PA allows us to do.
Okay.
Jen? Steve Trumbull, I'm with Aviation Week. First, I just wanted to see if it's, I know it's probably going to be an outcome of the concept stage, but what comes after that? Some kind of timeline between the end of the concept stage in 2025 and IOC or fielding or whatever you want to call it. And then so far, through the pre-concept stage and through what you're talking about here, do you see any daylight or any variation between what the U.S. Army came up with in capability set 3 and what NRGC and what the European need is in comparison to that? Just at this point, even at a very broad level.
It's interesting also, we've had the US team observing NGRC, Next Generation Rotorcraft. So through some of the pre-concept phase, they've actually been observing the steering board. So that's been useful because they've done the hard yards in certain areas in regards to their concepts and what they're developing over the US. Some of the stuff is really interesting, and they've helped us understand how they got to some of those conclusions at a less sensitive level. So what you'll see in Next Generation Rotorcraft is some similar attributes that FVL is based on, but also the mission sets and where future vertical lift was orientated towards the pivot to the Pacific. There's a slightly different requirement for European-based nations, which might not mean that future vertical lift is a solution. But they've absolutely been involved in the steering board as an observer, giving us some advice and guidance on all their work they've been doing. So we are connected, and we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, if I may add something on this issue. Yes, just to pick up on this, there's also a requirement for interoperability. So we need to develop capabilities which are compatible with the evolutions of some of the systems that are being developed in the US, not only in terms of technology, but also in terms of battle rhythm. Being able to have the same tempo, cover the same areas, have the same operational radiuses. These are key so that we will not be left behind when we are in the field and we launch a joint operation with U.S. and allied coalition forces. So this is at the basis of the cooperation. There's not, I think, any formal document which links NGRC to FVL rather than our mutual participation to some of the same forums, the same exercises. We've been, in particular, invited Italy as a nation to Edge 22, our last exercise for FVL, which took place in Utah, and the dialogue, which is essential in understanding where the projects are going. Are the timelines compatible? We're obviously we're definitely behind the development of the FVL program, which was and is aimed initially at the U.S. Army requirements, which are only the initial set of requirements. On the other hand, there's also interest on the U.S. side to see where we might be going in some of these studies and the developments that we will be doing on our side. Maybe, will it be a multi-engine machine, a single-engine machine? Would it be of interest maybe for the other armed forces in the U.S.? But we are, I think, separated by a number of years of planning and of development that we are definitely will try to somehow allow to converge, but are essential for us to understand also where the U.S., which are in the lead on these programs, will be going, and based also on their discoveries and experiences, we will be able to assess and analyze also our own decision making process.
No more questions? Well, thank you to the panelists, and thank you for being there this morning. Have a good day. Bye.